I think take questions because
Yeah.
you're running. Seems to be a little behind.
Reset. Just a quick question for you, Warren. When you describe the moral hazard of the Eurozone, would your description then be different if there were a political superstructure that becomes all of those nations together, one political?
Yeah, if the deficit spending was done at the new fiscal authority, call it the European Parliament, then you don't have the race to the bottom. It's when you split things up and make them compete with each other. So, for example, if you have federal pollution control laws, you don't have a race to the bottom. But if you have state pollution control laws, then the state that allows the most pollution gets the most business. Okay, so, yeah, the consolidation would take care of that.
Warren, Joe Bongiovanni from Kettle Pond Institute. When you floated your proposal on your blog about the European Central Bank paying out $1 trillion, I asked you the question, is anybody going to issue any debt to do that? And eventually you answered me back and said, no, there would be no debt issued. Am I right about that?
Right, it's just a payment. It's not a loan, it's a payment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So does that hold true for deficit spending by us then? That is to say, our central bank, when we're going to deficit spend, can they also just make the payment without issuing any debt? Thanks.
So if the federal, what I'm saying is if the federal government pays you money, it can either pay you money or loan it to you. If it pays it to you, you have no debt. If it lends it to you, you have a debt. So when the European Central Bank makes a per capita distribution of €1 trillion, there is no, the member nations, it's not added to their debt. They don't owe it back to the European Central Bank. When the Federal Reserve makes a payment, it goes into someone's checking account. It's not, we can call that a debt. It's how you define which account the money's in. We don't count that as
It's like helping our state governments, national state governments.
Right. But if the Federal Reserve makes a payment to anybody, whether it's a payment to the state of Connecticut or payment for, it goes out and buys a box of pencils, it goes into somebody's checking account, okay, and it goes into a reserve account at the Fed through your member bank. Okay, we don't call that debt. It's only when we move the money from the checking account to the savings account that we call it debt. All right, and so what's called debt at the federal level, I would not call it debt. I never would have called it debt from the beginning. It used to be called debt because we owed the gold that were in reserves. Once the gold was gone, it's no longer debt. It's payment in kind. Okay, so it's just a store of nominal wealth for the other guy. It's not a debt. So the European Central Bank hasn't started on a gold standard, so they don't automatically call something debt that isn't debt. So they don't have the problem of creating debt when they spend. So it's a little bit of a technical answer, but the answer is a payment from the European Central Bank is not booked as debt anywhere because they never have booked it as debt. We book it as debt because we have a gold standard tradition that caused us to book it as debt. It's both, they're all the same thing. Okay.
Question for Warren Mosler. Since I'm a foul-mouthed leftist blogger, so I'm going to frame this as polemically as I can. Speaking to the question of the tragic mistake theory, is there reason to choose the theory of the tragic mistake as opposed to a theory that this is a deliberate act of policy that's meant to cause as many people as possible to suffer and die? How would I choose one theory as opposed to the other?
I forget the saying, but it's better to presume innocence than to how does it go? My book up there that I've got called The 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds. It was John Kenneth Galbraith's last book, The Economics of Innocent Fraud. He said it more eloquently than I did, but it's the idea that when you presume innocence, it's actually more of a you're making a much stronger statement than imputed guilt. Yeah.
And you would have evidence to back this up?
Which?
Why should we presume innocence? Based on the record of the last 30 years or so.
Only as a point of logic that you're better off presuming innocence.
So
as part of the argument.
As a rhetorical tactic.
Because like you're to say the person is, I'm not sure how to. As a rhetorical tactic, You presume innocence.
Okay. As a foul-mouthed leftist blogger, I can
Yeah, you
completely accept that.
Yeah, presuming innocence is more powerful than is a far superior rhetorical technique. And yeah.
Someone asked me
Because then you're presuming that, especially if it's something really simple to understand, okay? Because then you're really throwing the onus on the other guy. You're either like complete idiot or you're subversive, which is it? So you're kind of like giving. Okay.
Someone asked me at lunchtime whether the European leaders knew about options to solve their current issue. And I said to them that if you read the documents and the debates going back to the Delors papers and then subsequently, you will be left with the unambiguous impression that they know all the options. And most recently, the German finance minister was interviewed, and it was in German. I couldn't find it in English. I was going to try to put it in the English version, but it was in German, but fine. And what he said in the interview was that when they framed the common currency system, they had a choice. And they had a choice to add elements that would have made the current crisis not a much lesser crisis. And those elements were a system to deal with asymmetric shocks, in other words, a fiscal redistribution system, and also as Warren said, a single fiscal authority. And he said that was debated, and if you go back to the original debates, you see the debate there, and they chose as an explicit choice to exclude those characteristics from the system, the very characteristics that would have made the current crisis significantly less severe. They chose explicitly to exclude them from the system. And as soon as the common currency came in, Germany then introduced their so-called Hartz reforms. And these were reforms that, because previous to that they were able to maintain their export competitiveness through exchange rate movements, once they lost that capacity because of the common currency, they had to work out another way to stay one up on their other countries, and so they brought in significant deflationary measures in their labour market. Casualised significant sections of their labour market, reduced workers' real wages and conditions, the whole Hartz agenda. And these were all very explicit choices and decisions they made within the context of the institutional system they were setting up. They knew the alternatives, and they knew that once the crisis hit, then the weaker countries in a trade sense would melt down as they are. So I'm not so sure I agree with Warren in emphasis. I think that they...
Just rhetoric, Bill, just rhetoric.
Yeah, no, I understand the rhetoric. I don't think... I think that I prefer to say that they aren't innocent. They took an ideological decision. They were scared to death. There's a cultural animosity within Europe stemming back to the Latin and the Germanic cultures. The Second World War's had an incredible influence on the way they've structured the evolution of the European community and now the EMU, and the ideology surrounding all of that led them. The Germans dominate. They don't trust the Italians and the Spanish, and particularly the Greeks, and they set up a system that would punish those countries in the event of a crisis, and they deliberately did it, and they know the options. They know all of the options that could reduce the pain, but they don't want to do it.
There have been statements out of Greece that they owe us these loans for war reparations.
Yeah.
I've got my book here that I brought some copies of, which you can download for free at MoslerEconomics.com, or you can buy for $10. Shameless promotion here.
Bob Hall from Kilowatt Cards. You said that, and it's pretty clear that raising taxes reduces demand for goods and services, but it also seems to reduce other kinds of things like greed or power, unbalanced power. Very rich people have enormous influence. And so I think back to the situation after World War II when the upper tax rate was 90%. And people always talk about that as if there were a lot of people paying 90% marginal rates. And I don't think very many, if anyone, ever did. I don't think anyone made that much money. What happened was, faced with the choice, if you're an employer, of taking money out of your company and giving 90% of it to the government, or distributing some of it to the workers instead and getting something for it, that was a better choice. And so I can understand the idea of lowering taxes, but at the same time, you're also unbalancing society, and you're letting people accumulate so much money, and we don't know what kind of crazy thing they're going to do with it. How do you control that? I mean, we don't let people keep bazookas and landmines to protect themselves, but we're letting people get rich enough to compete with countries.
Second Amendment. No, those are all very legitimate political decisions, yeah. Those are political decisions. Those are the consequences of policy. But it doesn't mean the government's going to run out of money.
Follow up on that. I mean, how does that jive with the notion that tax rates should be used to regulate aggregate demand? I mean, because if you're saying that, if we're going to use
first of all, we didn't say tax rates.
Or
taxes.
Taxes. Okay. I mean, but the tax code has been used to redistribute income, and in my opinion, right now it has been hijacked to favor upper income households. I mean, now we have huge income inequality in this country, and how do you? So again, how does that jive with this notion of regulating aggregate demand?
There's a bigger problem with that, because what also tends to happen is people wind up with the same after-tax money. So when you raise tax rates, and you keep, let's say, wages stay the same, tax rates go up, and government stays the same size, that means the higher incomes go high enough to adjust for the taxes. So after the Clinton years, you see, oh, gee, look, we collected an extra $1 trillion in taxes because of the higher rates. Yeah, but those people earned an extra $5 trillion in income. So it's a moving target as well. And there's a lot of intuition, I guess we called it an illusion to what's going on. When you dig down into it, everything government does has distributive consequences. And those should be the first and foremost political decisions, not whether we've run out of money or not, or whether we're going to borrow from China. What these myths have done is taken our eye off the ball of what I would consider the important decisions. When I did a paper with Randy and James Galbraith, we gave it to the GAO and FASB on sustainability, and we said, look, the problem is 100% of your time, money, and effort is going into figuring out government solvency, and none of it's going into the inflation problem. I said, okay, so what you've got is 100% of your resources going into the thing that doesn't exist and nothing going into the thing that could actually be a problem. And that's indicative of what's going on at all levels of government, because they don't understand the monetary system.
But this is more than,
yeah, no, I understand.
It's more than just political. I mean, we are talking economic. Income inequality is an economic issue that is challenging, in my opinion, is probably one of the biggest challenges to our democracy.
Right, but it's not, what I'm saying is it's not getting the attention it deserves because they're worried about things that shouldn't be getting any attention. And we're not going to get attention to those issues until we get rid of the things that are taking all of our attention, like China and the budget deficit. If we stop thinking about those, we'd have time in Congress to talk about something else.
I want to add a couple of things. So we're arguing taxes drive money. Taxes don't pay for government spending. Okay, so that's the fundamental point. And then the question is, what kind of taxes? And Warren said the head tax actually is the best thing to drive currency from inception. But once
it's the easiest thing to understand.
It's also the best thing to drive. But once we've got a monetary economy, then we can use an income tax. We could have an inheritance tax and so on. So then the question is, what other things can taxes do? And so yes, we use taxes to punish certain kinds of behavior, bads, right? And then we can use tax breaks to encourage other kinds of behavior. And we could use inheritance taxes to try to prevent accumulation of dynasties of wealth. We could try to use taxes to address income inequality. Now, one word that you said that I don't like is redistribution, because we can always raise the income of people at the bottom without taking from income at the top. The reason is because we don't really take income and give it, because taxes don't pay for the government spending. We can always have as much welfare as we want without taxing the rich at all. Okay? Then just the final point I would make, and I'll just state it as a claim, and I think that you said this. In fact, taxes never reduced income at the top. It does not work. They have too much political power. They get the exceptions written into the tax laws. So you never achieve the 50% tax rates on the rich. So we should think about a different way to prevent income inequality. I don't think the tax system will work. Prevent the income in the first place. That's the best way to do it.
I'd like to thank you for this explanation about the European Union. And I have a question, because many things are a matter of politics, and the journalists got a very clear understanding of that yesterday, when there were questions about Greece and how to solve that. There was a clear separation that the president is not going into financial issue. There are so many other things that are coming up and are to be discussed with the American Congress. But he said it was just like not his venue. And my thinking is that at the time that the decision was taken that some things were excluded, it was some time ago. The people who are right now deciding about things may have not heard about that. Like they were busy doing other things in Europe, like there was solidarity in Poland, and the president was then part of the movement. So my thinking is if there is a part of information and knowledge that can change things, what I see here, there are actually people who could be empowered to introduce, some new things, new solutions, but they are not available. And because there's so much going on, what I'm trying to say is that there should be a stronger voice of these statements that I hear here, just like out there. Even, because that may be the case. There are people who could make use of that, and it's just not available. And, I'm used to that as a journalist, because it's our job to connect certain niches of the society. And, and there is also, it might be even the case, because there was this, right now it maybe doesn't exist that much, but there was this opposition between, the situation between Poland, Germany, and Russia. So there was this German influence at the beginning of forming of the European Union. It may be changed right now, and it may be time just, try it a little bit, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I'm trying to say that this what you represent may be really appreciated at a very high levels, only there's a way, how to get it out there. Because it's not, there may be just, some kind of lack of information.
I'll just say, well, you're a journalist, so you can write a story about this if you, that's the short answer. The second point in regard to the American context is that there have been voices out there. In fact, I would say that virtually everyone on this panel has been amongst those voices. I mean, I've been reading Bill's stuff for many years. I've been reading Randy's stuff. I've been aware of the stuff on the Levy Institute for at least the last 12 years. And they have been voices in the wilderness. They have been marginalized. The people that are Obama's main economic advisors right now are the architects of the crisis in the 1990s, Larry Summers, the Bob Rubinites that are all in power. The argument at the time was, well, we need, this is a financial crisis, and we need experts, who are familiar with the markets to deal with this. And, my response has always been, well, look, if I go to a doctor and he botches up my surgery by amputating the wrong arm, I'm not going to go back to him just because he has greater familiarity with my body. But, that seems to be the general consensus of the way things operate. And in regard to the question on Europe, some of us have been writing about this. I've been writing a lot about this. Bill's written a lot about this. Rob Parento has written a lot about this. And we've been going to London and to many places in Europe over the last several months. I've been talking about the epicenter of financial instability gravitating from the U.S. Towards the European Union because of this Euro problem that Warren described so well. And for a while, people couldn't understand why I had this obsession with this stupid argument. But to me, it's very interesting because even though we'd like to think about Europe as maybe, in some respects, a more social democratic paradise than the U.S. is, in fact, it's neoliberalism's last stand. I think the most extreme ideological tenets of neoliberalism are now embodied in the Maastricht Treaty, the Stability Pact, and if this thing blows up, as I think it might be, as I think this will be the classic overreach moment, and I think this could be the area where all of a sudden people are going to say, well, some people did actually obviously diagnose this. I mean, I remember Warren last summer writing stuff about saying, there's a solvency problem in Germany, and most people would say, Germany, are you kidding? That's absolutely insane. But, as this thing begins to metastasize a lot more, I think people are going to say, what is it that causes problem and who actually diagnoses correctly? So I think in that regard, what's happening in Europe is very, very significant right now. Maybe in some respects even more significant as to what's happening in the U.S.
A comment really, Roger Erickson again. I want to get back to the question that was raised by the person behind me. How do we protect our systems against these kinds of disconnects? And actually, if you go outside the narrow field of economics, there is very rich literature on this very question. If you look at the field of ecology, systems theory, anthropology, many others, and all the way up to military operations, there are literally thousands of tomes and books and theories, mathematical models, physics models written about this, and what ties them all together is system stability. So eventually, as people are saying, we'll wake up and realize that things are going south. The general response about how you protect it is that the simple answer is in any complex system, what keeps system stability is eventually interaction and the knowledge throughput, the data is shared throughout the system. So the simple mantra that comes out of this is interaction drives awareness. Until we have more crosstalk among these different professions, our electorate and our elected officials are not going to have a general consensus on it.
Do you have any comments?